Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, July 22nd. Welcome to a joint committee session of the Council. This is a work session with the Transportation and Environment and Economic Development Committees, and Council President Friedson is joining us as well. There are a number of items on our agenda today. First, we are going to start with a discussion about parking lot districts and urban districts. More specifically, we're going to talk about the revenues raised and the expenditures used to make sure that our downtown areas are clean and safe and lively, all the things people come to expect when they visit our downtown areas. And this is a discussion that I have been pushing ever since I joined the Council and joined the Transportation and Environment Committee, because every time we have a discussion about the budget, specifically regarding urban districts, we are continuously told that the current model will not work in the future. Specifically, the revenues raised through parking fees as we continue converting more parking lots into housing, as people have different hours in which they conduct business, go to restaurants, visit our urban cores. It is changing the math. And in addition to that, the costs associated with maintaining our urban districts continues to increase. We last had a conversation on this approximately 1 year ago on July 27th and have gone through the budget, but this work session is the deepest dive we will have to date about the current state of affairs, because ultimately we all want and need our urban districts to thrive, not only for all the residents who are moving there because of the walkability, but because of the businesses that continue to stay there and relocate there because their employees want that those same conveniences of amenities, walkability, and safety. And so I'll turn it over to the chair of the Economic Development Committee if she has any comments.
Good morning, everyone. Very excited to have this work session today. As Councilmember Glass mentioned, this is a conversation that we have had in the Economic Development Committee for a while, especially because the districts, the urban districts, get funded by the parking lots. Okay, so we really need to have a deep dive about the funding mechanism and see if we really need to update it. I'm not going to answer that. We're just going to go for the committee work session and see. So with that, thank you so much for your time, and I'm going to go back to the chair.
Any other comments from colleagues? No, we'll hop right into it. Mr. Kenny and Ambinder.
Sure. Thank you for the introduction. So this is a discussion around funding for the parking lot districts and urban districts. Council staff has prepared data on the fiscal health of each entity and how they interact, as well as some information on recent discussions that have been had around both. So one item worth noting is that the transfers from the 3 parking lot districts to their respective urban districts were reduced in the FY 2025 budget in order to maintain a 25% fund balance in each parking lot district. The resulting gap in this previous budget was covered by an increased general fund transfer to the urban districts. The structural issues in terms of revenue and funding for the parking lot districts will likely continue in coming years, so the discussion of how to cover the remaining urban district budgets will likely continue, whether that's how we did it this year with a general fund transfer or otherwise. And we'll get to the more specific urban district issues just a little later, but first a deeper dive into parking lot districts. So for the record, the county operates 3 parking lot districts: Bethesda, Silver Spring, and Wheaton. Each PLD includes several structured parking garages and surface parking lots. The PLDs are funded primarily by parking fees and fines, And the PLDs have also historically collected a property tax, an ad valorem property tax, from property owners that did not wish to provide parking on their own to mitigate that requirement. But the council voted to eliminate this tax in 2016 and have the PLDs rely entirely on their fees and fines for operations. Parking fee revenue in all three PLDs declined during the pandemic as fewer people paid for parking, but has been slowly recovering. I'll turn the committee's attention to Figure 1 on page 3 of the packet, which depicts this phenomenon. You'll see after FY 2019, the revenue generated by parking fees decreased to a low in 2021 and have been slowly climbing ever since. The fee revenue for the Silver Spring and Wheaton PLDs are higher currently than they were in 2019, so we have climbed out of the pandemic hole and are past it. The Bethesda parking lot district is 5% lower than it was in 2019. However, this is due to the fact that a portion of the what was once fee revenue has been rather transferred into property rental revenue as Garage 11 has been rented by the Marriott in Bethesda. So functionally, all three PLDs are generating more in fee revenue now than they were during FY 2019. However, this rebound of parking fee revenue is projected to be slower than would be required to cover projected capital and operating expenses in coming years. In order to maintain the required 25% fund balance for each PLD, that is the funds on hand as a percentage of next year's coming expenses, the executive projects that the county will need to increase parking fee rates for all PLDs in 2028, in addition to the fee increases approved via increased hours of fee collection in 2024. The Bethesda and Silver Spring PLDs will also require further sources of additional revenue beginning in 2026 to make up the entire gap. I'll turn the committee's attention to Figure 2 on page 3 of the packet and Table 1 on page 4 of the packet, which depicts this phenomenon. You'll see in Figure 2, which displays capital expenditures by parking lot district from 2019, which is actual, through FY 2030, which is planned. The capital expenditures increased starting in 2021 and 2022 to act on some deferred maintenance and renovation activities that the parking lot districts deemed necessary. Aside from FY 25, are expected to continue at this higher rate. In FY 25, the Silver Spring, which you'll see dipped significantly in FY 25, that is due to a need to cover that 25% fund balance, and capital expenditures this year in FY 25 are being covered by outstanding CIP dollars that the Silver Spring PLD had left over, and the significant jump this year in the Bethesda parking lot district capital expenditures are due to a property sale that enabled some additional one-time capital spending. But you'll see in FY 26 and then through FY 2030, the Silver Spring and Bethesda PLDs are expected to level out at this higher rate that was established around $6 million for each in FY 22 and then through FY 24. And then the result of these higher rates and sort of more slowly growing revenue is Table 1, which depicts the increased fee rates required in FY 28 for each the Bethesda and Silver Spring PLDs, and the other additional revenue that the PLDs and the Office of Management and Budget have projected to be necessary to cover all projected expenses. The increased fee rates you'll see will jump, for instance, for the Bethesda PLD from $750,000 in 28 to $1.5 million in 29. That is just one projected fee increase. It is projected to happen partway through FY28 and then be annualized in FY29. That's what is causing that. And then the other additional revenues vary by year. Essentially, all of these other additional revenues are just the remaining revenues that are required to get to that 25% fund balance. So, all of this to say, since the creation of the urban districts in the 1980s, a portion of each PLD's revenue has been transferred to its respective to its respective urban districts. Parking lot districts are an important source of funding for the urban districts, as county code requires that each PLD transfer to the respective urban district must equal at least 10% of the combined value of the PLD transfer and the urban district tax, though existing PLD transfers exceed that percentage by quite a bit. As shown in Figure 3, this is the phenomenon that we're sort of exploring relative importantly for the urban districts. In part due to declining revenues and increased capital costs, transfers to the urban districts as a percentage of total expenditures plus transfers have been declining since FY21 in the Bethesda and Silver Spring PLDs. In Wheaton, those transfers were increasing prior to 2025 and decreased roughly as a percentage to match the Silver Spring PLD in FY 2025. So we are seeing as capital costs and other expenses rise faster than revenues for the PLDs have decreased their transfers to the urban districts to match. And now I will turn it over, or pending.
Let's take a quick pause and open up to any questions folks might have on the parking lot districts specifically. Again, that's the revenue source, right? So one of the questions I have, and I see Director Conklin, I don't know who else from DOT might want to join us for any potential conversations that we have. Mr. Wolin. So, oh wait, yeah. And Mr. Hartman as well. So thank you very much, Mr. Kenny, for the data and the presentation of the data. I think it's very helpful to see the last number of fiscal years and the projected future fiscal years. One of the things that we continue looking at are our public parking garages and to see if there could be other uses. You mentioned one of them specifically, and it is the parking lot that Marriott is essentially leasing, and so that plays into some of the revenue sources. But we are constantly talking about reusing our infrastructure, our parking lots, turning them into mixed-use property, turning them into other things. Tomorrow there will be a joint conversation about Silver Spring and tearing down a parking lot or handing it over to United Therapeutics and then rebuilding another one, right? So there's always conversions that are taking place. What, at this point in time, does DOT envision for the future of a number of parking lots, and does the data that we've just been presented take into account the potential reuse, thus decreased revenue in certain parking lot districts?
That's an excellent question. Thank you for that. There are at least 4 or 5 active development proposals currently being explored with PLD property. There are 4 parking lots in Bethesda that are there's active development proposals or even agreements with developers to move forward with construction of housing on those projects. Like you mentioned, there's the United Therapeutics Garage 2 disposition that you'll be considering tomorrow. There are other current proposals to convert parking lots to housing in Silver Spring and also in Wheaton. So this is an all-the-time exercise that affects all of the PLDs. Generally, there's a short-term revenue impact when one of these development proposals moves forward because we lose use of the parking lot during the construction phase. Most of those projects include a replacement of the parking over the long term, and that consumes a lot of the revenue the county would attain from the disposition of those projects, it's usually reinvested into the PLDs to maintain the parking supply. In Bethesda, we have bond covenants that require a certain level of revenue generation, so those property dispositions have to provide a similar level of revenue. So over the long term, the redevelopment generally is not affecting the revenue of the PLDs because some of the PLDs, like Silver Spring, are over capacity. And for example, Garage 2 will be replaced with a smaller facility, recognizing that some of that capacity is underutilized. So there's expenses with maintaining that larger facility that aren't generating revenue for the entire scope of that facility. So there are some cost savings with a similar revenue projection. So that is something that's evaluated with each of these redevelopment proposals, but generally the redevelopment may be shrinking the overall size of the PLDs. In some cases, that may reach a point where the PLDs are fully utilized. The Bethesda Downtown Sector Plan, when it was adopted by council, there was analysis that showed that with the loss of the parking and the increased development, that PLD will be fully subscribed at the mode share target for Bethesda, so there will be no surplus anymore there. But that is a factor that goes into the evaluation of all of those development proposals about whether you need to retain all of the parking that was there or not to maintain the revenues of the PLD. But there is a short-term impact, obviously, during the construction of those projects.
I just wanted to accentuate that point. So there's a short-term blip when general fund, or whether it would be a shortage of revenue that's received.
Yeah, there'll be a reduction in PLD revenue sometimes with those projects.
Very good. Thank you. Chair Fana-Gonzalez.
Good morning. So let me tell you what I'm hearing so you can see why I'm asking the question. So and you know my background, especially you, Mr. Conklin, you have met me since I was on the planning board, and I'm
Yes.
all on board when it comes to walkable communities. There is no excuse there, like crystal clear. But I can tell you, like, there's not a single meeting that I have had in Wheaton, and as you all know, Wheaton is one of the urban districts that we have. Not a single one when the conversation about the parking lot rates is not raised. And it's coming from restaurants, most of it, okay? That feeling that my customers cannot come in without getting hit with a huge, especially ticket, right? Because when we have our staff, county staff, presenting tickets to folks, I think the average is like $45, right? So people are really frustrated, and I get all that frustration mostly on a daily basis. And so two questions there. So I needed to say that. And it's coming from all types of business. And I'm talking again about Wheaton, about my district. So from the small, Salvadorian pupuseria shop to the big music store that I'm not going to mention their name. Huge one. Same complaint coming almost on a daily basis at this point. So first question, and I'm asking it because I've been receiving comments from people saying, I want to take my business somewhere else where I can have free parking. That's what I'm getting right now. How do we compare in the county and in all these urban districts? How do we compare with places outside Montgomery County in terms of parking rates? Think DC, think of places somewhere else nearby. Are we like really far apart, or is it about the same? I don't see that in the reports.
That's an analysis that we've done oftentimes with the parking rate proposals. Mr. Tamana, I'm sure, has more specific information. Generally, we've found that our parking rates are lower than other paid parking facilities.
Okay.
But again, in the context of Montgomery County, there's lots of areas that have free parking.
Yeah.
So obviously, having the rate structures we have is more than if you're in a shopping center in North Bethesda or in White Oak.
Right.
It's obviously more expensive to have paid parking for customers than in those places. But I would mention that the provision of that free parking isn't free. There's a cost associated with that free parking that's embedded in the rent for the space that a business might occupy. So yes, it's free to the customer, but it does affect the bottom line of the business, even if there is, quote, free parking at that location. But Mr. Tamana can provide a little bit more information about other paid parking rate comparisons.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So yes, every time we go through the rate increase discussion, we do compare with both surrounding jurisdictions and the other PLDs. The Wheaton PLD currently has the lowest rates compared to the other PLDs. It's, I think, $1.25 for on-street parking and $1 for off-street parking. So it is a fairly nominal rate, but as Director Conklin mentioned, it is, you know, a rate higher than free parking in other places in the county.
Love it. Now, the second question that I have leads to some of the comments that Director Conklin mentioned. I think what we're lacking right now, especially after I'm having these conversations with folks, is that people don't understand what they're getting, okay? I think there's a lack of understanding of the benefit of being in an urban district. And yes, I'm paying for the parking, but this is what I'm getting. So I don't expect you to answer that right now, but I seriously want to have some type of you know, visual Q&A. This is what Wheaton, Bethesda, downtown Silver Spring, Frenchy Heights is getting. This is a huge benefit. Yeah, we're paying for a parking lot, but you know, we have the red shirts, we have a whole bunch of stuff that other communities don't have, and that level of education is missing, believe it or not. And I see it on a daily basis. So I would say that we need to, if one thing we're gonna come out of here is to have DOT with our comms folks, with, you know, organizing that and having that one sheet explaining the benefits and getting into an urban district. And this is a conversation that we have had during the budget with the Economic Development Committee, looking into the possibility of having pilots, urban districts in all the other council districts that don't have one. Think of Germantown in District 2, Olney in District 7, White Oak in District 5. But having those pilots requires money. People are gonna have to make those sacrifices. But you know, but if you look at the benefits, I think that's when people embrace the idea. So I think we need to work on that urgently. As a district council member, I say that. So with that, I yield back.
So you are thinking ahead, and that is the next part of this conversation, specifically the urban districts and how we use the revenues that we're speaking about. So hold on to those thoughts. Vice President Stewart.
Thank you. And I just want to continue on what both of the chairs have been talking about our PLDs. And first, I want to say thank you. Because as everyone I think knows, downtown Silver Spring is having some kind of summer when it comes to our transportation, and it has been very impactful. And the department has really stepped up and helped some folks like Easter Steels and other places make sure that they can continue to do the vital services that they provide, even though we're having continued Purple Line construction, the shutdown of Metro, and disruption. So first, I just want to say thank you for all the work that has gone into this summer, in particular, making sure people can get around in the downtown area, get to work and play and all those things. What I'd like to really dig into, and I appreciate Chair Natalie Fana-Gonzalez thinking about other things we need for this conversation, because I think this is a very important one. But before we jump to the next step of what are we going to do about these dwindling revenues, I do think we need to dig a little bit more into what are we doing in our parking districts, because there's probably going to need some type of transitional time. And from what I see and the information that has been provided to me is that there are a number of garages in downtown Silver Spring that are not at capacity or well below capacity, particularly during midweek. And we are stuck in a mindset when we think about our parking and our permitting of people going to work, working 9 to 5 somewhere. And and stop me and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the way we do our permitting, our monthly permitting, the categories we have, the paper permitting and everything else is really stuck in the past. And we have less than 2,000 permits per month in the downtown area. But we know, because I hear from them daily, and I know we send them to you, we have businesses, we have nonprofits, and other folks who are saying we're really struggling here. And we're going to be struggling at least for the next 3.5 to 4 years until the construction on and the Purple Line opens. They need parking for their employees, and they need parking for their volunteers. In downtown Silver Spring, in particular, there are 2 groups who have been asking, and we sent a letter, an email from my office over to you all in May, and I don't believe we have received a response yet. But there are 2 groups of essential workers: daycare providers and people who work with our unhoused population. Let me take the second first. Our unhoused population has increased 71%. 71%. People who work for us and do this work of helping our unhoused population are overwhelmed. They are asking us to please help them with their volunteers to figure out parking. I think that's the least we can do. But yet we have yet to figure that out. The second group of people are folks who provide daycare. And Silver Spring is a great place to provide daycare, right? We have a lot of density, we have a lot of families, we do have Metro, Mark, and Metro is going to open again at the end of the summer. We have the Purple Line coming in. We want our families to be there. We want our daycares and early childhood places to survive. Unfortunately, we all know, and this is not just from Montgomery County, but this is across the country, that our early childhood folks are woefully underpaid. And unfortunately, right now, we do want people to be using public transit, but at least for the next couple of years, that's going to be really constrained in our downtown area. And they have also been asking for help. So I think as we look at our PLDs, where we are capacity-wise, because we still have capacity, particularly during the week when people who work in these professions are asking us for help, and we have people who are providing essential services to our families, to our community. I just feel like, and they're not asking for free. They're not saying give us free parking. I just want to make that very clear. They're asking, is there some kind of way we could figure this out? Because the way we do permitting now is really cumbersome. To get a paper permit mailed to you once a month and fill that out, and we pass on to you all the complaints we get when people don't get them in the mail, is really cumbersome. So how do we do it? We figured out something for Marriott. I was told we figured out something for Whole Foods. Why can't we do it for some of these groups? And then the last thing I'll say is that in the district and other places, as Chair Fanny Gonzalez talked about, I don't go into the district without using Spot Hero if I'm unable to take Metro. I tried it the last couple of days. Like, Spot Hero doesn't work for our downtown Silver Spring area. It's not identifying spots. And I don't know if that's because we don't have the system set up with the sensors or other things, but we're also missing opportunities for making it easier, especially at this time when we don't have our public transit, for people to visit our downtown area. Because I know most people now don't go somewhere if they have to drive or they can't take public transit who don't look at Spot Hero or one of those apps. I'm just using that as an example. So I know that's a lot, but I think all that I shared are things that I have said before, so I don't think anything is new. But I do think before we look at some of the proposals to increase revenues, we need to take a hard look at what are we doing with our parking structures, and how do we, particularly in this period of time when we're transitioning to a lot of our public transit that hopefully will be in a different world 4 to 5 years from now, but how do we maximize in that short term some revenue opportunities and really help the community?
I'll start at the beginning of your question, which was the use of the monthly permits, and obviously that's where we've seen the biggest decline in parking utilization, is people who were driving to Silver Spring and taking Metro downtown who might purchase a monthly permit, or other office workers who were there 5 days a week. for a regular work schedule and would purchase a monthly permit, and those are significantly down. So there is a need to look at that structure and see if that structure makes sense. There are other ways that an employer can provide bulk parking for employees through the Park Mobile system that we're happy to work with individual employers on. In terms of the need for perhaps lower rate parking for specific, say, county-sponsored activities, currently the parking lot district model relies upon the full generation from parking use for use of those spaces. So in other instances, when a county department has had a need to maintain or use certain numbers of parking spaces, that county department pays for the use of those parking spaces, and that's a regular routine activity that happens all throughout the PLDs. And there might be something that can be worked out for the workers that are supporting the unhoused and daycare activities on that, particularly if they're county sponsored or subsidized programs. There may be an opportunity there. I'll let Mr. Tamana talk a little bit more about how they help people find parking, and it may be that unlike a commercial garage that subscribes to a bunch of commercial parking information providers, we may not be doing that, but I'll let him speak to that more directly.
So as you did mention, parking occupancy is down significantly, so we do have ample capacity at most of our facilities. It's the on-street parking where we do have trouble with occupancy and finding the most convenient spot. But we do have in very close proximity parking available for all kinds of durations. So the need for providing real-time information on where you can park has diminished quite a bit. So the way we try to educate the public is if you have a short-term need, that is, you're trying to get to a business right on the curb and maybe get a quick coffee or something like that, you go for short-term parking on street. If you're doing anything more than 30 to 45 minutes or an hour, it's probably better to look at an off-street facility, which is in very close proximity to on-street parking. And it's important to note that a very small percentage of our inventory is on-street. It's less than 10% of our total spaces is on-street. So most of our capacity is off-street. And we do differentiate in the off-street facilities too. The more convenient spaces are shorter term so that you can park and get to your destination quickly, and the more long-term parking, 4 hours or more, are at the higher levels or places where you can it's not maybe the most convenient in the facility, but you still have that ability to get that parking. We do partner with Park Mobile, like Director Conklin said, so the Whole Foods situation that you mentioned, it's a business account that Park Mobile allows each business to set, where you can manage how many permits you want to buy and distribute them to the different employees. So they provide a digital code that you can give your employees. It could be unique to each employee, or it could be just the same code for all employees to use. So there are ways that we can help with the processing of employee parking in a one-stop shop kind of situation that works with the Park Mobile system.
Thank you. I think that would be hugely welcome and better understood. And I know I see Mr. Jacob Newman here from our regional services, and I'm sure Stephanie Helsing from the chamber is probably watching, since she's not here in person because she always watches. And I do think maybe working with both of them and setting up a time, a Zoom or in-person meeting where we could disseminate that information to some of our smaller businesses on how they could take advantage of that. Because I do think one of the things that does happen, and I know you and I have talked about this before, and I know businesses aren't supposed to do this, but employees do take that on-street parking, and even though it's time limited, there are ways around it. So they are taking up some of that parking, and so also if we can facilitate having employees use the longer term. So I think that would be hugely helpful. And then, and Director Conklin, I know that working on figuring out how do we keep whole the PDLs and transferring, it's not a simple thing, and we need to work that out. But I think as we're having these conversations, we have this resource and we can work it out. And I really appreciate all the work. And I forgot to mention before, I appreciate the new paint and the look of the downtown Silver Spring parking garages and all that. We've had conversations about that, and last week I did notice the new painting and everything else, and they look good. So thank you. I yield back.
I appreciate Vice President Stewart's questions. As someone who, when living in downtown Silver Spring, had those monthly permits, I want to pick up on that. I know you focused a lot on the employment aspect of it. With regarding the residential, as more buildings have been built, what has the utilization of our either our permits or the parking garages been for those new residents, either in Bethesda, Wheaton, or Silver Spring?
They still have not picked up completely to the levels before, so yes, there has been an increase, but if you look at our permit purchases, we're at about 50% where we were before. And there's been some increase, and that may be some from the residents that's contributing to that 50% level. It may have been much lower if it were just employees, which is what primarily our customer base was prior to the pandemic.
So if I heard you correctly, what you just said was that most of the monthly permits were for workforce, right? Not for residents. Okay.
Yes, commuters.
Very good, commuters. Thank you. Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. I appreciate you all being here today. So I think this is a great, having this discussion, I appreciate having it now because this is the discussion that we typically have during budget, and we can't do anything about it at that point in time because it's a complex interconnection between the PLDs and the urban districts. So I appreciate having the time to do that. And I think this conversation really underscores the question of whether, which is what we're going to go into next in terms of what are the other options, because having the expectation that the PLDs are going to continue to fund the urban districts at any level, I think we need to just recognize that's not going to happen. I think that the key issue is that when this was set up and the expectation was set up, we had new parking garages, we had parking revenue, excess parking revenue, but now we have aging facilities that we need to continue to make sure are safe, and not only safe from a security perspective, but just safe from a facility perspective. And I also just wanted to bring up the issue of the rates. Raising rates isn't the answer because it has such a integral connection to the economy of the area, and I think that and I appreciate that our rates are lower than maybe DC and other jurisdictions that have parking. I think there's an expectation of what we're paying for parking, which gets back to Chair Fenny-Gonzalez' view of the consumer, the resident, the commuter. What is their expectation? And I think there's an educational component. I did want to bring up one specific issue, and that is the reserves. And we have a 25% fund balance reserve, and I'm just wondering if that could be part of the equation of do we need a 25% reserve? Is that something that we should look at when we're discussing this? I don't know if you, Director Conklin, have a thought on that.
I can speak a little bit to it. So a lot of parking operations will have a depreciation account where they actually accumulate funds into a reserve account. That's not the case for our parking lot districts. We have a fund balance target, which is how much cash is available at the beginning of the fiscal year to support operations, of 25%. So there isn't really any accumulation of funds. That fund balance rolls over year. And the main reason for that is to smooth out any unexpected revenue unevenness that may happen at the beginning of the year so that it doesn't impact operations, or to deal with an unanticipated facility need. For example, an elevator failure that needs a repair that's not projected and planned for in the budget. That's a relatively small cushion that accommodates those unexpected needs or unevenness in revenue. So it is not like most commercial property or large parking system operators would have a reserve account that they can draw upon. It's more of just carrying over a minimum fund balance so that we're not starting each year with nothing. We're starting with a quarter of the anticipated budget available at the beginning of the year, and that's why it's been set that way.
And that fund goes up and down through the year?
It does, based on seasonal variation in parking demand and based on, again, unplanned maintenance activities. We have a capital program that we've planned for things, but there are other maintenance needs that crop up that aren't planned, so that's what that helps to cover.
Okay.
And it also helps offset, wind, rain, flooding, other events before those transfers happen to cover those events from the weather response item in the budget. So there's really not a lot of float in there. You could pick a different fund balance. So you could pick a 30% or 20%, but it doesn't change the fundamental need to have some constant level of funding available in the account to sustain the operation.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, colleagues, for all of that. Now we're going to transition to the expenditures of those revenues, and that is our urban districts. And just want to thank everyone in the audience who works in our urban districts for the work that they do day in and day out. Turn over, Mr. Ambonder.
Thank you. So the urban districts portion of the staff report is broken up into 3 sections. Section 1 is some funding, context, and historical background. Section 2 discusses the current status of the general fund transfer to the urban district and some potential options for funding going forward. And Section 3 discusses in more detail the commercial district charge that is currently in place in Friendship Heights and how that might potentially be applied to either the existing urban districts or future place-based management organizations within the county. So beginning on page 5 with some funding context, the Bethesda, Silver Spring, and Wheaton urban districts' major sources of funding are an ad valorem property tax charged on property owners, as well as transfers from the parking lot districts and from the general fund. Figure 4 to Figure 6 on pages 4 through 7 of your packet illustrate the historical makeup of each urban district's revenue. Historically, urban district property taxes and transfers have provided dedicated streams of revenue for Bethesda and Silver Spring, which have minimized the need for additional county funding from the general fund. The Wheaton Urban District does also receive some property tax and parking lot district revenue, but historically has been funded by a larger general fund transfer since it has not generally had the same level of development as the other 2 districts. As the figures show, Figure 4 and Figure 5, in Bethesda and Silver Spring, the recent decline in parking lot district revenue is coupled with a corresponding rise in general fund transfers. In terms of expenditures, on page 8 of your packet, Figure 7, based on information that council staff has received from the urban districts, we show the budget broken down by percentages in terms of expenditures on the 4 categories of services and functions that urban districts perform for the committee's information. So with that background, we move into more specific discussion of the general funding for the urban districts and the transfer policy on page 8. As Mr. Kenny noted in the previous section, parking lot district transfers to the urban districts are projected to decline in future years, and in FY25, the general fund transfer increased for each of these 3 urban districts relative to the FY24 transfer as the parking lot district transfer decreased. Table 2 here shows that the size of the general fund transfer to each of these urban districts for FY25 was more than what was needed to offset the decrease in parking lot district revenue. So even accounting for a decrease in parking lot district revenue, the urban districts receive additional funding beyond that from the general fund. And you can see percentage-wise that is less of an increase in Bethesda and a larger percentage increase in Silver Spring and Wheaton in terms of the percentage of the overall general fund transfer. So this sets up two questions that the committee may wish to consider. What role should other funding sources, especially the general fund, play in addressing these decreased transfers and these anticipated continued decreased transfers from the parking lot districts? And more broadly, what should the policy rationale be for general fund transfers to the urban districts in FY26 and beyond? So we've outlined some options here. Before I get into that, I'll pause for a moment for any questions.
Go through your options,
Great.
and
Thank you.
we'll ask questions at the conclusion.
So staff has assembled a number of potential options to address these questions. Option one is the status quo, continuing to provide general fund transfers as needed to each urban district to fund their services, which is likely to result in increased transfers to each urban district, again, as PLD revenue is expected to decline. Options 2 and 3 are various versions of a similar philosophy, setting either a percentage cap figure for general fund transfers to each urban district or a dollar cap figure for general fund transfers to each urban district. This does not necessarily need to be the same figure for each of the 3 urban districts in view of their different background of other funding sources. And neither of these figures necessarily need to be absolute. There could be inflationary adjustments built in or personnel adjustments based in, but it would put some sort of predictability into the size of the general fund transfer to each urban district. Option 4 is identifying discrete urban district services to support through the general fund. These could be services provided elsewhere in the county by other county agencies, which would represent a recalibrating of the original baseline services model that was established in the 1990s and has evolved significantly since then, or an expanded set of services in consideration of the urban district's role as economic hubs for the county. That figure on the previous page could serve as a starting point for identifying various categories of expenditures or various line items of expenditures that could be funded under this option. And then option 5, and this will segue into the third and final section of the report, is identifying discrete services in these urban districts that could be funded by an additional commercial district charge in these urban districts. This could be existing services that would take some pressure off of general fund transfers, or new and enhanced services that the urban districts would like to provide that could mitigate the need for future general fund transfers rather than being funded by the county general fund. So we'll discuss the trade-offs more in the next section, but happy to pause here as well.
Great. Thank you for that information. Just so everybody is aware, we are not expecting to make a decision on these proposals. This is the first time the Joint Committee is receiving ideas for moving forward, right? Because there's consensus that what is currently in effect is not working, and the data forecast that it will not work moving forward without being rethought in some capacity. I appreciate the leading question that Chair Fani-Gonzalez noted about baseline services, right? And understanding what businesses and residents are getting for their money. And I'm looking at figure 7, and I think that's a good place to start this conversation, where we see the expenditures by category as a percentage of total costs for the three urban districts: Bethesda, Silver Spring, and Wheaton. In Silver Spring and Wheaton, more than half of the expenses go toward maintenance, yet that is only 39% in Bethesda, where combined more than half of Bethesda's expenditures go to administration and marketing and promotions. I see Mr. Hartman is here. I see representatives from Bethesda are here. Yeah, if everybody who represents the bids want to come on down, or bids or urban districts, pardon me. Because I think the question of what are these funds used for, which are top line numbers given in figure number 7, let's use that as a jumping off point. Mr. Hartman, you know intimately this work.
Thank you so much, Chair Glass, and I appreciate you inviting the team up to the table. I'm sure we all appreciate the great work they do in the 4 urban districts. There's a lot to unpack here. And we've had several discussions about urban districts and the structure and the funding. And let's face it, Montgomery County has a unique system. We'd like to be unique in Montgomery County. And we're working on structures that were established 30, 35 years ago, parking lot districts, and we had a question earlier about how do we stack against our competitors, and you take Bethesda Row, a Federal Realty property, and Pike and Rose, a Federal Realty property. One property offers 2 hours free, the other one doesn't because it's a county garage, and the other one's a private garage. And as was said before, Federal Realty is able to charge their tenants in their leases the cost of that 2-hour free parking. And we, the county, don't have that mechanism. Our parking lot district tax is currently 0. And when we talk about the business districts, the county went out there and we set up these 3 urban districts back at a time when this was it. These were the downtowns of Montgomery County. We had the 3 urban districts. We had the suburban district, which had a lower level service, and then we had the rest of the county. And we got rid of the suburban district. We transferred the urban district maintenance responsibilities from DOT to the regional centers, and that's the model we've been working off of. Things have, there are some changes. Bethesda is different because we have a urban district corporation, which is a commercial district management authority, which does the day-to-day operation. But we if we had to do it over again, would we set up the exact same model given what's happening around the area? Probably not. The council commissioned a report, the previous council, about from OLO on different structures for business district services. And I have to tell you that what makes us different is we provide heavy maintenance in the urban districts. 3 urban districts here do all the sidewalk replacement, sidewalk repair, tree replacement, tree maintenance. If you go to any other bid in the DC area, they don't do that. They put the service request in with their local jurisdictions. So that's what this general fund transfer started out as, and it's been a difficult number to track over the years. And I have to tell you, staff laid out the funding options. That there's another option that maybe we should think about, come back and think about the urban district tax. If you compare it to business district taxes all throughout the DC area, is very low. Bethesda's tax for the services BUP provides is 1.4 cents per 100 assessed value. The Georgetown bid tax is 16.22 cents for 100 assessed value for the work their bid does. And their bid doesn't do heavy maintenance, unlike BUP. So love to dive into the specifics, but I think there are several buckets that we need to continue a policy discussion on, not just parking fees and taxes, and how do we stack and how do we make it seamless for the customer to find parking and have a pleasant experience. But there's the level of service our business districts do. Friendship Heights is a new model. They don't do maintenance. They do marketing. They identify service needs. They've done some planting and beautification, but they will never have the trucks and the sidewalk concrete crews that Bethesda and Silver Spring and Wheaton do. So just some opening thoughts from me.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. So just diving further into the data in figure number 7, I'll turn over to Bethesda. Thank you guys for being here. Can you share as to why the Bethesda, the marketing and administration are different than the other 2?
So yes, thank you, Jeff Burton, Executive Director of Bethesda in Partnership. Thanks for having us. So first, for administration, 2 key things to keep in mind that's different from us from the other 2 urban districts. One, about 30% of that comes from rent that we pay because we are not housed in a county building because we're not an official county entity. So a large chunk of that comes from that. And then also there's a paid staff person in the Regional Services Center at Brandon that's the urban district manager whose compensation and things come out of that. So that's why that administration. And then I can't speak to what the other 2 urban districts do, but as you all know, we're very heavy on events and marketing in downtown Bethesda. So we have a full calendar of events, whether it be large street festivals or smaller events, that contributes to that larger portion of events and marketing, I think. And then I'm not a parking expert, but I will give you my 2 cents on parking as we're considering this. We didn't charge for parking on Saturdays in our garages for a very, very long time. And we heard a lot of complaints from business owners that there wasn't any available parking in the garages on Saturdays, because what happens when you don't charge for parking is people come and park on Friday afternoon, residents, friends that are coming to visit residents, employees that are working at the businesses who shouldn't be parking there, Friday afternoon through Monday morning, and then there's no available parking for any of the restaurants or the retailers. So that's just something to keep in consideration as we're having this conversation.
I think that's an important detail to highlight. Thank you. I don't know if Mr. Fosselman, do you have you look like you were going to say something before. No, you're good. Okay.
No,
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But Mr. Burton, I appreciate you highlighting the fact that you're paying rent, right? And so clearly that's administrative costs, and then the additional employee, and that is additional administrative. So.
And one other thing I'd like to highlight, if I will, is I know that the urban district model was set up a long time ago, but I will tell you we're very active in the International Downtown Association, and most business improvement districts would trade places with us because of our connection to the county government and the fact that we can actually maintain the infrastructure that's in our downtowns. We're not just a reporting entity, and I also don't think that DOT has the capacity or would want to take over all of the maintenance that we are all doing down here. So just keeping that in mind. We are a model, and we're a model that everyone else in the world would love to be.
Thank you. And then last comment I'll make before turning it over to colleagues. The packet from last year, when we last took up this discussion, and it was an Economic Development Committee discussion, not a joint committee discussion, and that was a packet for the July 27th, 2023 session. There is on Circle A1 a baseline services comparison. And so as we talk about and enumerating the services that are provided, we can recycle that and bring that into a future conversation so that everybody can see what those fees and pay for. Chair Fonda Gonzalez.
Yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, Chair Glass. I still want to dig a little more into the maintenance situation and how it compares in each district. I mean, you see this chart on Figure 7, and you see 53.9% in Silver Spring, 51.5% in Wheaton, and 39% in Bethesda. That's a huge difference. And maintenance is key. People want to go to places that are clean, that where people feel safe, that there is lights and great sidewalks, and it's hard for me to understand how is it that we're not paying as much in Bethesda versus all the needs that are happening in Wheaton and Silver Spring. And I can tell you there's so many things that we need to fix in Wheaton. Speaking of my own district and neighborhood, how does it happen? Don't tell me that Bethesda is not paying money to take care of all this maintenance situation. Are they getting funding from other sources? What's going on here? Who can answer that question? Ken, I'm looking at you.
I'm unsure of what the question is, but happy to answer.
You don't?
Well,
okay.
Jacob,
maybe it should be Ken, because you're from Silver Spring.
I think that chart shows percentages. I think it'd be helpful for the council to know the numbers, the dollar amounts.
Yes, indeed. Okay, apologies, Chair Fanny Gonzalez. Jacob Newman, Director of Regional Services in Silver Spring. To talk a little bit more about what the percentages represent in Silver Spring, I'd like to just first acknowledge this is an imperfect, not apples to apples comparison, and I'll give a short example. Whereas the appearance of more invested into events in Bethesda as compared to Silver Spring, or marketing, let's say, the way that the budget is captured in Silver Spring, our maintenance staff are putting on a ton of effort for events that others have cultivated over the last 20 years in Silver Spring. So it's an imperfect way to kind of categorize or analyze the work of our maintenance, clean and safe teams, their support of third-party events in the downtown. And as you all know, from March until October, every single weekend on a Sunday there's a festival. Every Saturday throughout the year there's our farmers market. And so I think it speaks a little bit to the challenge of really comparing apples to apples. In terms of other things that you mentioned, the overall maintenance, I would like to acknowledge all of you and thank you for reinvesting in our downtowns. It's something that hadn't been done for years, decades. And so that specifically it was around sidewalk maintenance, lighting maintenance, and some dollars to benefit this overall marketing events and promotion of our downtowns. And I think that fueled, certainly in Silver Spring and to a certain degree in Wheaton, the spike that you'll see in the general district, the general fund transfer to our respective urban districts.
Luisa Cardona, Mid-County Regional Director. Just wanted to add to that when you look at the cost and sometimes the variation, as a government agency, we are required to use county contracts. And sometimes you see a significant difference in cost when it comes to those, right? Whereas BUP could potentially just go with the lowest, we are required to go through the process, which looks at diversity supplier, looks at other benefits that are important and valuable to the county, but that does have a significant impact on cost.
Thank you for that, especially stating that, because that's one of the huge difference that we have here. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Sales. Oh, I'm sorry. Who?
I was just going to add one quick thing about maintenance. Oh, I'm Natalie Avery. I am the director of the Friendship Heights Alliance, and we have the contract to run the Friendship Heights Urban District. I think another major difference that's really important in terms of maintenance costs is what maintenance property owners themselves do in the front of their buildings. So there's a really big difference. In Friendship Heights, there's some properties that don't do any maintenance at all, really, and then others who do extensive daily cleaning. And so I just want to echo that there's just a lot of apples to oranges when you're looking at cleaning in districts based on what the private property owners do.
And if I might add one more detail, I think the other thing is that each one of our urban districts is so unique in size and composition. We have a tri-section of state highways that go through the downtown, the number of optional method developers, and so forth.
I think that's a really interesting point that was made about the different properties, particularly in Friendship Heights, right? I'd be curious at a later point if we could discern those different utilizations and levels of service outside, whether it is an HOA condo board, whether it is a commercial rental property, or whether it is a commercial business property, right? Residential rental property, and maybe extrapolate from that, right, different ways of thinking and utilization. So thank you for raising that. Councilmember Sales.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to everyone that's here to discuss this new transition potentially. When we decided to create the Friendship Heights Urban District, I know there were some community conversations, and I don't know who can speak to that. Ken, you can speak to how community conversations were developed to shape how that process would unfold, and if we're going to be doing any discussions with the other urban districts about these options. Looking at the options, I think a combination of 4 and 5, but given the uniqueness of each district, it's going to be difficult to create a baseline level of services provided at each one, and so it would be helpful to see that breakdown of services, but wanted to see if you were going to be doing a discussion with the community about these changes potentially.
Sure. Thank you so much, Councilmember Sales, for that question. Friendship Heights was very very unique approach. We had, for years, we've been talking with property owners in Friendship Heights about the economic decline of retail. They had several malls that were not doing well, facing stiff competition elsewhere. And the germs started of an idea of why don't we get everyone together and create an entity that's going to reinvent Friendship Heights. We'll do the marketing, we'll do the events, create a sense of place, unify the district, which is divided between Montgomery County and the District of Columbia. We work very closely with property owners and others who are pushing for this new entity to be created. On the DC side, they moved to create a bid, instead of creating a bid on the Montgomery County side and going through two different processes, the decision was the course we charted with Councilmember Friedson and of course playing a leadership role was we would create an urban district on the Montgomery County side that would then pay for services from the bid that had been established on the DC side, and the bid would have a dual and unified role. This involved a lot of community conversations. On the Montgomery County side, we have 6 property owners who voluntarily said, "Tax us. We want to do this service. We'll give you a budget, and we'll talk about a rate." So it was very much not the county saying, "Hey, we have this idea. It'll be great. Don't worry about it. We got this." It was the business community saying, "Hey, how can we collaborate? This we want to get this idea done. Government, how can you help us do that?" And we did it. Similar situation is emerging in Germantown. And I forgot to mention that as Friendship Heights was organized, we provided grants through our business district grant program to get them started, to get them organized, to get the alliance, to match funds that the district was providing to the alliance. Germantown, fast forward, here we are today with Germantown currently receiving the first of a 3-year business district grant from Montgomery County to do the same thing, to have the conversations with the property owners, the businesses, the community about what do we want to do together and invest in it. Because at the end of the day, we are going to be paying the fee, whatever amount it is, to do whatever the idea is for downtown Germantown. In the other areas, that the council and the committee, the ECON committee has talked about, we've had a conversation in the Alney community. They're not quite there. They have some needs, but they're really more of a community grant, event matching funds. White Oak, we're in the 2nd or maybe 3rd year of a grant with the Friends of White Oak for marketing and placemaking activities. I'm not sure where they're going to go. And in the Pike District, we're in the 2nd year of a grant to the Pike District Partnership, which is also looking at what structure do they want to be. Do they want to be a bid? Do they want to be something else? But I guess my point is all of these new efforts, and even in the original efforts in Silver Spring, Bethesda, and Wheaton, were largely business-driven, very close conversations with the chambers and the businesses and the property owners, because when these were set up, they were set up with the support of the community, not something we, the government, decided to do and they followed along. It was quite the opposite. The 3 areas said, and DOT, I know none of you were here back then, they said, we need a locally directed effort that's not DOT driven, that we believe will be more responsive to our maintenance needs and our community needs. And that's what they got. And that's what we set up. So we'll continue conversations with all the communities I mentioned that we're working with and more. We have our Main Street grants that are currently going out to 5 different organizations in places like Long Branch, Tacoma Main Street, Rock East here in Rockville, and a few others. But it's all building the capacity for these organizations to then take on a role and then suggest how they're going to fund themselves to continue that.
Thank you, Ken. I'm just looking at the options, and if we're even considering, adapting the Friendship Heights model to our urban districts, it would be helpful to have our businesses present in this conversation to see how they feel about potentially being taxed when we're trying to recruit and retain businesses, grow businesses, and better understand what that looks like across each of our unique districts. And so I hope this is the first of many joint conversations, and hopefully we can have the chambers and the smaller chambers as well come in and join the conversation. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. This is definitely a continuation, and as was noted before, the last time we took this up, or historically when the council takes this up, it's during the budget season, and we don't have the adequate time to dive into it, and so we are carving out the time, and this is the conversation with our government partners. I absolutely agree. The next level of conversation needs to be with our stakeholders, those that are paying the fees and wanting the services, and I think it will be helpful to hear exactly what services they want and what they are willing to do to receive those services. Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. So I think when we, and thank you all for being here and for what you do, and you do a great job in supporting our urban districts. So I think that when we look at the options, based on the conversation that we just had about parking lot districts, I think the bottom line, the starting point, I should say, is that our parking lot districts are whole, and we make sure that they have the resources that they need to make sure that is successful and secure. And so, I think in the short term, we're looking at the parking lot districts providing some, perhaps, funding. Depending on where that goes each year, and that there is certainly a level of general fund transfer, because just like we want the parking lot districts to remain whole, we certainly want urban districts to have the resources that they need to continue to do the job that they're doing. And so I think that this is a longer discussion when we look at general fund transfer. And I think that I would be interested in, as we move forward, getting along, the baseline service has always been a little bit vague, and so I would like to just have a more focus on what are those services. I think that's important to highlight. And then also, Mr. Hartman-Espada, I really appreciate your point about when this was set up, the reason why the urban districts are doing maintenance was at the time that was set up, DOT felt that would be a more responsive way to do maintenance. I think that that's something that, I don't know if anybody from the DOT wants to share their thoughts now, or that's something that we have in a different conversation. Is that process working, and should we continue that model, I think is an important part of this discussion. So those are my thoughts for now. I think the idea of looking at a Friendship Heights model for the existing urban districts, that is a lengthy conversation, one that we're certainly not going to do before March of when we start looking at the budget, or when not even March. I'm sure that your budgets, you start long before then. So I think that that's kind of where I'm thinking right now, is that just as we start to transition, getting a handle on the maintenance and where we all think that should go, and then the baseline services.
Thank you, Councilmember Balcom. So picking up on that point, and I know that Mr. Fosselman wanted to make a comment a few minutes ago. My understanding that Bethesda Urban Partnership in particular has done some research or questionnaire surveys with your stakeholders. Can you share what is at the top of their mind? What are they most interested in receiving?
So we have, through our strategic planning process, have done surveys, and I think that remembering back to them, because they were done about a year ago, the two most important things that we do that they want us to continue to do is the maintenance services and the marketing and special events. One of the things they like the large street festivals, but want us to move towards more smaller, more frequent, because we're a very much more residential downtown than we've ever been. And then twofold, I think I brought up to the Economic Development Committee the last time we met during the budget process. Our board has hired an independent consultant to actually look at some scenarios for us on funding models, and he will have that information available by September, which we will share with all of you. And it's looking at multiple different things here, keeping the connection to the county government, understanding that the parking lot district is not the cash cow that it used to be, and we need to lessen the burden on that. And then looking at, is it a combination of, can we get rid of the urban district tax and supplement it with this commercial district charge, the optional method development fees that are all confusing, that don't happen in Wheaton but happen in Silver Spring and Bethesda. So kind of I think the basis of this is to look at trying to make it an equitable funding source so that everyone is kind of paying their fair share for the services that are being provided. And so we're working through that. We're working through it with your staff here at the council. We've had a couple of meetings with them, gotten feedback, so we should have kind of more concrete information for you on what those options look like. What we don't want to do, let's use Marriott for example, because someone brought Marriott up. So Marriott's paying a certain amount in urban district tax, a certain amount in optional method development fees. If we change to a new model, all of a sudden, if it's commercial district charge, that fee goes way up. We obviously know they're not going to agree to do that. So we're trying to find a happy medium that makes kind of everybody happy. Another thing that I wanted to go back to, because someone brought it up before we move forward, just so you know, in our budget also, we raise about a full month of operating budget for our budget on our own from outside contracts and event fees and sponsorships that we do. So keep that in consideration when you're looking at the urban partnership budget.
Great, appreciate all those comments. And if you could share with us, I know you're in conversation with council staff, but if you can share with us also the results of those surveys to help better inform us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Council President Friedson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to both chairs and both committees for having these conversations, and for all of you for not only the responses today, but for everything that you do. I mean, so much of what we're talking about in terms of driving Montgomery County forward is the increasing expectations of what an urbanizing county looks like, and that means increasing pressures and increasing responsibilities and obligations that are being placed on urban districts that were not anticipated when these were created originally, when clean and safe was the focus almost exclusively, if not exclusively, and today it's to create a city environment in areas that hadn't historically been thought of as cities, and in fact are as urban as any place anywhere in the state or in the region. And so I think that's part of it. I appreciate Councilmember Sales, the points that she was making in terms of how important it is for the stakeholders to be invested in these conversations. I think that's a key point here. I think one of the conversations and aspects of this conversation that troubles me, that I think we need to avoid, is this idea of almost all or nothing, like we're going to do the same thing in all of the urban districts. I don't think that's the intention, but I do think that sometimes that's how the conversation moves forward and how the packet sometimes reads. And so I just want to make sure that we avoid that and make sure that we recognize that each of the urban districts is unique, as we've heard from colleagues and as we've heard from the people who are actually doing the work each and every day. There's nuances to the charts and to the data and what they mean. There's things that are included and not included. There are different ways that each community has evolved. And the entire secret sauce to the urban district model. The whole point of doing this is recognizing that one size does not fit all, that we want to have an on-the-ground entity, whether it's government or nonprofit or bid or some entity that is able to be eyes and ears, is able to be, boots on the street, is able to respond to the changing needs on a day-to-day, minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour basis. And we're not going to come up with a one-size-fits-all model that accomplishes that, nor should we attempt to. So I just think we need to be careful of that. I also think we have a lot of things that are working here. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that so much of what is happening in our urban areas, in our urban districts, are going well, and we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater. We do have some funding questions. We do have some sustainability challenges. We do have changing dynamics in the marketplace and changing dynamics in revenue sources like PLDs that we've got to get a handle on and figure out and work through. But we can't do it in a way that, while trying to fix the things that aren't working, hurts the things that demonstrably are working. And I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that in this conversation either. There are so many things about the most vibrant aspects that are happening. I was just in Bethesda on Friday night and was part of the concert series that happens on Friday night. It's one of those smaller festivals that that you heard from Mr. Burton, that Bethesda Urban Partnership. And I was talking to the team, and they were setting up while I walked back from a meeting, and then I was able to have dinner, and it was packed with residents of all ages, from infants and toddlers to older adults and retirees and everybody in between. We see that in other places around the county as well. We don't want to lose the benefits of that, and there are trade-offs. Everything sounds good until you actually delve into the details, and there's no perfect solution here. An urban district charge has trade-offs, a tax has trade-offs, but the key is, one, to make sure that we acknowledge the uniqueness of each of our areas and communities, and that we are responsive. That's the whole point of doing this. If we're not going to allow these to be unique structures that are set up to meet those needs, then we might as well just have county government do it and have a one-size-fits-all, which I think loses the whole point. I don't think anybody is looking to do. And then the second piece of it is to not, to do no harm, being the first piece, to make sure that we're not, breaking what is clearly working. And the third piece is to make sure that the stakeholders are directly invested. Each of the success stories that we have had haven't been county government in a committee or in a blue ribbon panel or work group coming up with the solution and telling the stakeholders this is what it's going to be and you're going to like it. It has been them coming to us and saying, here's what we want, here are the services we think would be helpful, here's what we'd be willing to pay for them, can we make this work, coming together, figuring out, and then executing on it. If we can make that happen, ensure that it's unique in each of these communities, I think that would be great. And then I think we have two different opportunities here. One is to look at the existing urban districts. The other is the emerging ones and figure out the structure for the emerging ones. Figuring out the structure for the emerging ones is a much different conversation in North Bethesda and in Germantown and in some other places as it is with the existing structures, because as I have said, that the one lesson that I have learned being on the county council for 6 years in local government and local land use in particular, the only thing that people like less than the way things are is change. And so we have to be very careful and tread very, very lightly and make sure that we have the input of the stakeholders in every decision that we make. So appreciate you allowing me to join in here and really appreciate the effort and the interest in these issues, and I'm here to support in any way that I can.
I appreciate those comments because they are entirely in line with the work and goal of this joint committee. This is a data-informed conversation, and after we dive into this data, think about this data, we're going to do that outreach and have those continued conversations with stakeholders to see how they want to move forward, because the bottom line is the status quo is not working. We need to adapt, and it's just a matter of how we do so. Chair Fani Gonzalez.
Yes, and I would just add one more thing, especially with the understanding that we are not evolving without the community and everybody together. One beautiful example is happening in Wheaton. We don't have an arts and entertainment 501c3 in Wheaton. So I've been working for the past year, so many meetings with the business community, with the nonprofit community, with residents, with students, going to the local community to establish a 501c3 that will focus on arts and entertainment, kind of similar to what's happening in Bethesda, so they can take on that role and help us find ways to get more funding away from the government, because we do not want the government to continue to work on urban districts, not because they're not wonderful people, but because if you want to be creative and if you want to have the community to really embrace their neighborhoods, you need to give them the opportunity to do just that. So that's happening, and very exciting work, and I look forward to, after that's going on, to look into the conversation of contracts for maintenance. That's one key thing, because if you want to go to a theater and go to the Wheaton Arts and Entertainment Center that we're building, you want to make sure that the place is beautiful and clean. Maybe it should be that 501c3 handling that with the contracts that is happening in Bethesda, but we're going to take on that conversation later on. Anyway, exciting time, and I look forward to continue having these conversations with the local community. And sure, as it was mentioned before, in Germantown, these conversations are happening in White Oak, in Olney, Silver Spring, Wheaton. We already having this conversation with our local communities, and we're going to be evolving with them, not without them. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Fosselman had a comment, I think.
Thank you, Chair Glass. I do, but for a moment, if I could yield to Ms. Avery. That's the original reason why I was trying to get your attention.
There you go. Ms. Avery, you have our attention.
Thanks. I just wanted to, I think what Councilmember Saylor said was so important, that this should never be perceived as just the county saying, hey, we want to tax you. And I think one of the secret sauces of Friendship Heights was that it was initiated by the property owners and the business owners. And I think what's really important about the approach is that it was the urban district fee was seen as a co-investment in making the place better, because I think really key to economic development in the county everywhere really is the growing importance of place versus just location and individual building. And that is what the investment is in. It is, yes, clean and safe is critical to that, but also marketing, understanding the local ecosystems and how they work. And that's that it's not just a transaction. It's not like, oh, we're paying extra for these services. We are co-investing together. And I think another thing that's really important when you think about the county and the private sector working together is that by the property owners co-investing in this place-based approach, the county is able to leverage that expertise. And so I just think that sort of not seeing this as an either or, but a both and is critical, and I think seeing it as a co-investment and not a tax is critical. So.
Co-investment in our community, beautifully said, and absolutely correct. We have one more item or aspect of this conversation before we turn it over to another somewhat related. Thank you, President Friedson, for joining us. So, Mr. Ambinder,
thank you.
Going through.
So this section lays out some additional factors to consider, some of which the committee has already discussed, regarding the possibility of implementing a commercial district charge either in the existing urban districts or potentially in new urban districts as well. And this is based on a request from the ECON committee's previous work session to continue to revisit this possibility. For the committee's information, at the top of page 10, Table 3 lays out the commercial district charge that is currently in place in Friendship Heights, which is a rate of 16.5 cents per square foot of office, retail, or industrial space, and $120 per unit or per room in multifamily and hotel. In FY24, the Friendship Heights Urban District received about $617,000, and the same amount was approved in FY25 based on these commercial district charges. Due to logistical challenges in implementing this new structure, the charge was not collected in FY24. Finance does plan to collect the charge in FY25, but this is a reminder going forward of some of the logistical challenges inherent in switching or adding a new structure. Council staff also conducted some preliminary analysis on the size of the charges that would be required under several hypothetical funding scenarios, and staff would like to emphasize this is a high-level hypothetical analysis to illustrate the impacts and implications of instituting a charge, not necessarily a recommendation to implement the charges in this vein. Scenario A, which is broken down in page 11 of your packet, considers replacing parking lot district revenue in each urban district with a charge, effectively replacing the entire parking lot district transfer to each urban district with a charge in the same vein as the commercial district charge. In addition to the policy considerations surrounding removing the parking lot district transfer from the urban district, staff will just note that per the county code, as Mr. Kenny mentioned, currently parking lot districts are required to send at least a 10% balance. So this scenario would not be practicable in that sense currently either, but is illustrative and zeroing out the parking lot district transfer and replacing that with a charge in addition to the ad valorem property tax in each of these urban districts would leave a charge of 11 or 12 cents per square foot in Bethesda and Silver Spring respectively, 5 cents per square foot in Wheaton, $70 or $80 in Bethesda and Silver Spring per room, and $38 per room in Wheaton. Scenario B, which again is hypothetical and just for illustrative purposes, envisions replacing all existing urban district revenue, the property tax, the parking lot district transfer, with a commercial district charge, which would require the rates shown on Table 5 at the top of page 12 of your packet. These fees, these charges are significantly higher, of course, to compensate for the reduction to zero of all other revenue sources. Just to give the committee a sense of the charge, for Bethesda and Silver Spring, property owners would effectively need to pay a total rate equal to their current ad valorem tax rate plus an additional fee that slightly exceeds the Friendship Heights charge in order to generate revenue at the FY25 approved levels. In Wheaton, that charge is significantly higher and likely impracticable, but is provided for additional information. Alternately, and this is not a scenario that's broken out with numbers, but is one that follows up on the options laid out in the previous section, the urban districts could consider implementing a commercial district charge in addition to existing sources of revenue to fund additional or enhanced services. The size of the charge would vary based on the desired services and their corresponding costs, and council staff could do some preliminary analysis based on any potential additional services or substituting commercial district charge for existing services that the committee is interested in. Based on all of this, a commercial district charge may be an effective tool for generating revenue for the existing urban districts in the medium to long term, but additional challenges do remain in the form of collection logistics, identifying the specific goal of such a charge, and as the committee mentioned, soliciting community feedback and support. The committee could request that the urban districts work with property owners and other stakeholders to identify desired services, whether existing or new or enhanced, that could be funded by a commercial district charge. Additionally, to the extent that a charge would replace the ad valorem property tax, it's important to analyze how properties would be impacted on the individual level. So, for example, one could envision a smaller property in terms of square footage with a high value that goes from paying a higher, relatively speaking, ad valorem property tax to a lower commercial district charge based on square footage. And so individual property owners might pay more or less under a change, even if the overall revenue stays the same, for example. And so that's something that it would be important to understand. What is the impact on every individual property owner? And additional analysis would be needed. As Council President Friedson mentioned, while the commercial district charge may not necessarily be the best fit in the short term in the existing urban districts, it does have several advantages for new and emerging place-based management districts, urban districts, business improvement districts, or main streets elsewhere in the county. This would be commensurate with a, for example, fee-for-service model in which charge payers pay a fixed agreed-upon amount in exchange for specific marketing or place-making services. And of course, the charge would not be subject to the provision in the county charter that sets limits on increases in the overall property tax rate. That said, the county should also weigh benefits from a commercial district charge against the benefits of an ad valorem property tax in any of these emerging areas, which could be appropriate in circumstances when an entity is asked or is interested in itself making investments as opposed to providing discrete services, so it's more things like capital investments. So with that, happy to answer any additional questions.
Very detailed proposals, much appreciated, and a lot to think about. Chair Fana-Gonzalez.
So I'm going to commit, and I'm going to say this not as the chair of Economic Development Committee, but as a district council member with an urban district, that we're going to have to organize another town hall. So maybe in the fall with all the local businesses and residents from the Wheaton urban area. And I would say that one thing that we need to, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it in this future town hall, just because I don't think this is a committee conversation, this is something that needs to happen in the neighborhood, is the reality that there's some property owners that are amazing. They take care of the building, they put the lights when they're out, but there are others that are terrible landlords. They just collect the rent, and I've been hearing this pretty often, and they don't maintain their own property. And we have really pretty significant issues happening because of that situation. So if we start, and I'm not saying I'm voting for this, I'm just saying that this is a conversation from the town hall. I just want to say that again. Let's say that we have a special commercial tax. Would that be the solution for those bad actors who own property? They have the whole place rented, but they really don't follow on maintenance for their own property? Would that be something like, if you pay the tax, then it will be the government using those funds to do all the repairs and do everything that the landlord has not done? So that's going to be part of the conversation that I can see happening in Wheaton, just because we have so many cases where folks are just neglecting to keep up with their own property within the urban district. So that's my commitment that I'm hoping
we've already started the conversation.
As an arts entertainment district, we have done,
yeah.
But
so I know
not
you
officially.
We'll continue engaging. There are a lot of conversations happening in the Silver Spring area on a number of these issues, and I do want to thank. I know the chairs have said this, and I know many of us up here have said this, but the success of this is going to come from the community, from our businesses, and looking at how we address this. We do have an issue with our PDLs, but I do want to emphasize, as the council president did, we're doing a lot of amazing, great work. And we need to continue doing that amazing, great work, because it benefits not just our urban districts, but our entire county for the work that's being done. And we have other new areas coming online. So I join you in committing to continue these conversations and elevating them in the community, because I do think we need to be looking forward on how we are sustainable. And, this is, thank you for the conversation today, and we will continue.
Thank you. I have one final question for Mr. Anbinder about the different scenarios, the hypothetical. I'm looking at table 5, scenario 2, but I think it's applicable. Might be applicable to the first one as well. Parking fees. How do your scenarios interplay with parking rates and the need to change parking rates?
That's a good question. These scenarios would, at least scenario 2, which as you mentioned is table 5, would effectively be independent of the parking rate. It envisions, and this is true for the first one as well, actually, they both envision the PLD transfer going to zero, so the parking fee could be set at any level, and that money would just be retained within the parking lot district instead of some proportion of that being transferred to the urban district.
Thank you. That's what I assumed looking at this, but thank you for articulating that. Thank you all for this. Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify that we do have optional method tax in Wheaton. There's only 4, but we do have some.
No, absolutely. And again, that goes to the point where there might be universal policies, in some cases, specific policies in others, but each of our areas are unique. They're different. The business community, the residents, the level of activity, and so clearly one size does not fit all, but that's why we're taking our time diving into the data and so that they can best inform our conversation. So thank you to staff. Thank you to everyone from our regional services offices and our urban districts and all of those, the countless number of folks who are not here because they're keeping our communities clean and doing all the activities that we need of them and that people love about Montgomery County and our urban districts. So thank you all for this conversation. We're definitely continue it, right? Right, so we're all committed to having another one possibly in the fall after we get some more information and data. So thank you. And this conversation dovetails with the next item on the agenda, which is a review of Executive Regulation 821, Transportation Demand Management. And this regulation and the underlying law is a throwback in a few different ways. Transportation demand management here in Montgomery County dates back to the creation of the Silver Spring Transportation Management District in the 80s, when employers in Montgomery County were required to submit a traffic mitigation plan. And according to my understanding, that was a policy created by then Councilmember Ike Leggett. And then in 2006, the council created a system for transportation demand management fees and requiring certain employers to use those when they're building new buildings. And then fast forward a number of years to 2019, my first year, still technically December 3rd of 2019, of serving on the council, the Transportation and Environment Committee passed Bill 3618, Transportation Demand Management Plan amendments, which is the underlying statute for which the regulation we have before us was created. And the goal of Bill 3618 was to streamline and expand transportation demand management requirements throughout the county to better ensure that our transportation and environmental goals were being met. Because as we back then still had a lot of people commuting to our offices in our downtown areas, we wanted to make sure that we all participated in reducing traffic and reducing single occupancy vehicle use and improving our environment. But there has been a lot that has happened in the 5 years since. And so I understand why this regulation was not sent before during the pandemic, but there are a lot of issues to walk through and discuss because times have certainly changed. And so I don't know if anybody else has any comments. Turn it over to Mr. Kenny. Well, do you want comments now? I know you have a lot of. I will turn it over to you very soon. Okay. It'll be the Councilmember Balcom moment in a second. But Mr. Kenny, do you want to introduce and walk us through?
Sure. So I'll walk you through the packet, which covers first some background, highlighting a little bit more, although you did a great job introducing us, and then an overview, a summary of what is in this executive regulation, as well, and then a review of what the committee has done to date, what DOT has done to date, responding to some concerns from stakeholders, and then we'll walk through some amendments that have been proposed by Councilmember Balcom, and touch on each of them in groups for the committee's consideration. So this work session again, yes, covers Executive Regulation 821, which was transmitted to the Council in December of last year for consideration. The committee held a work session in February, but had some outstanding questions and requests for data. So the Council voted by resolution to extend the deadline for consideration for the Council's approval of this regulation, which now sits at September 30th. Diving into some of the background on this regulation. So yes, dating back to the creation of the Silver Spring Transportation Management District in the mid-1980s, employers in Montgomery County's TMDs, Transportation Management Districts, have been required to submit traffic mitigation plans. In 2006, the Council created a system for transportation demand management. These are very similar acronyms. I'll try to keep them straight for everyone. For TDM fees and requirements for certain employers, and also expanding those requirements to cover new buildings, new developments. The current TDM fee is 10 cents per square foot, yielding about $1 million, and all of this revenue goes to DOT's administration of the TDM program. And since 2006, traffic mitigation plans have almost entirely given way to TDM plans, which are slightly different. In December 2019, the Council passed Bill 3618, which expanded and streamlined the TDM process, and Executive Regulation 821, which we're considering here today, was required by that bill as a way to implement and further define the parameters of what that bill requires. Specifically, it expanded the number of employers required to complete TDM plans from just those in the transportation management districts to those in all red, orange, and yellow policy areas based on number of employees. We'll get into that a little later. And change some of the requirements for entities that are required to submit TDM plans. In addition, the main function of these transportation management districts is to set non-auto driver mode share requirements and goals for each of these districts in order to be more refined than the larger policy areas and master plan and sector plan areas, which is how these NADMS, non-auto driver mode share goals, are usually set. Table 1 on page 2 of the packet outlines each of these goals as percentages for each TMD, each district, as well as highlights the progress that each district has made toward those goals in the years FY 18, 20, and 23. Apart from North Bethesda, all 5 TMDs, so Bethesda, Friendship Heights, Silver Spring, and Greater Shady Grove, reached their non-auto driver mode share goals prior to the passage of the 2019 bill, mostly due to those areas' high shares of transit users. NADMS then rapidly increased between FY 20 and 23, primarily due to the rise of telework during and after the COVID-19 pandemic, causing North Bethesda to reach its goal and the other TMDs, the other districts, to far exceed their goals. And Table 2 on page 3 of the packet further outlines each of those percentages, and in each of the districts how that progress has been made across each non-auto mode share. So these districts are the ones that exist now, but after this executive regulation is approved by the council, MCDOT will transmit a resolution establishing new TMDs, as was envisioned in the 2019 bill, and council will have an opportunity to amend and adjust those districts, as well as the non-auto driver mode share goals within them. So this regulation is not the council's only bite at the apple in terms of defining and refining how the TDM program will exist going forward. And before going into the regulation and the definitions thereof, I'll pause for questions.
You want to just keep going?
Great. So while Bill 3618 in 2019 established the general framework for the TDM program, it required executive regulation to implement it and establish the finer details of of how the program will function. So I'll go over those. The regulation itself is attached in the packet, but I will go over in some detail what these requirements are as they exist in the currently drafted and written regulation for employers, existing buildings, and new buildings. So Bill 3618 expanded the county's TDM plan requirements for employers to include certain employers in all of the county's red, orange, and yellow transportation areas, rather than just limiting those requirements to employers within the transportation management districts. The current transportation policy areas established in the growth and infrastructure policy in 2020, that map is included in the packet, and the council will have an opportunity to review the 2024 growth and infrastructure policy, which will modify the policy areas, and that review will happen later this fall. So that's another opportunity the council will have to kind of refine how the impact of this regulation. The TDM plans are not required of employers in all policy areas. These in all of the red, orange, and yellow policy areas, they only apply in red policy areas to employers with over 25 employees, in orange policy areas to employers with over 100 employees, and in yellow policy areas with over 250 employees. So this, upon the request of the committee, council staff has worked with DOT in planning, and I'll thank my colleague, Mr. Ali, who's helped obtain this data as well, to estimate the number of employees that will be affected that currently are within the parameters of needing to submit a TDM plan versus those that will be required after this regulation if it is approved as written. The current number of employees that are in the districts and required to submit TDM plans are 1,175, and if this regulation was approved as is, and the growth and infrastructure policy was approved as is with the policy areas as outlined currently, a total of 1,422 employers would be required to file TDM plans. MCDOT currently has TDM plans on file from 444 employees, which is significantly less than the 1,175 employers that would be required in the districts. MCDOT attributes this discrepancy to the unreliability of some of the planning data used to estimate the total number of employers required covered by the in the districts, as well as the rapid turnover of businesses within the county, and the fact that some employers may not receive or may ignore TDM plan requirement notices. And the specific requirements for employer TDM plans are laid out on circle pages 6 and 7 and briefly laid out in this section of the packet as well. For existing buildings, moving on from employers, for existing buildings, for buildings, we're still just talking about the transportation management districts, not the wider transportation policy areas. So existing buildings are only required to submit TDM plans upon request from MCDOT, and these requests are usually made in response to large buildings with significant impacts on transportation policy goals. Bill 3618 made very few changes to existing buildings. and their requirements under the regulation for what they need to do under a TDM plan are very similar to those for employers. Moving on to the requirements for new development projects. Bill 3618 requires any new development or construction project within a district, within a transportation management district, to complete one of 3 levels of TDM plans. Each of those have different requirements and different eligibility. On page, I believe this is page 6 of the packet, Table A, pulled this straight from the regulation, outlines which types of developments in each of the different policy areas will be required to submit each level of TDM plan. This is based on square footage. So this will determine what level of plan an individual development will be required to develop. A brief overview of the 3 levels. Level 1 TDM plans. These are called basic TDM plans, and they require the designation of a transportation coordinator that must provide commuting data on tenants, attend DOT trainings, and promote and grant MCDOT access to the facility to promote transportation alternatives to tenants. This involves also, under the regulation, a permanent information display in usually the lobby of a building, which must include a digital display depicting real-time transportation information, for instance, transit, bike share, things like that. Level 2 action, these are action TDM plans, have all the components of level 1 plans, plus optional strategies selected by the owner and approved by DOT. These optional strategies are contained within Appendix A of the regulation, which is on circle page 27 to 32. What's new for level 2 plans is that these strategies must be accompanied by an additional financial commitment from the owner to fund their TDM programming at a level of at least 50% the annual TDM fee level, which is currently 10 cents per square foot. So this commitment means in total a developer would be spending 10 cents per square foot on the as a fee to the county, and then an additional 5 cents per square foot maximum, which can be required on their internal TDM transportation mitigation activities. Level 2 action plans also must submit a biennial report documenting the successes or the progress made towards goals to MCDOT. That begins after 2 years, and then these time horizons all come after the date of final occupancy, essentially when the building opens. If after 4 years of development, if after 4 years the development has not reached the TDM goals for the district, the owner is required under the regulation to revise its TDM plan and select alternative strategies from Appendix A. If the goals have still not been reached after 6 years, the owner must increase their financial commitment to 1 multiple of their TDM fee level. So before it was an additional 5 cents of the per square foot, this would be an additional 10 cents. And this additional financial commitment must continue until the project demonstrates progress over a period of at least 3 years. Moving on to level 3, results TDM plans. These take all the components of level 1 and level 2 plans, but have additional financial commitments above and beyond those in the level 2 plans. Those additional commitments are depicted in the table on that page of the packet on page 7, with up to 2 times the TDM fee on year 6, 4 times on year 8, 6 times after year 10, and 8 times the TDM fee after year 12. And these are all if goals are not being met for that property. There is a flow chart on page 23, circle page 23 of the packet, that outlines the complete process for independent consultant monitoring and how it leads to TDM plan changes, monthly requirements, and additional funding commitments. And I'll pause here for questions.
Are you finished with your presentation?
I'm finished with the outline of the regulation. The next component of the packet is next steps and revisions that have been made since 2021.
If you want to quickly go through that so that we can finish up with your presentation, and then we'll open it up to comments and questions.
Would you like me to go through the amendments as well, or stop prior to those?
Well, I would like Councilmember Balcom to be able to take the mic and walk us through some of her memo, her well-crafted memo. So you can go up to that point.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So Executive Regulation 821 was first advertised in September 2021 in the Montgomery County Register. Many comments were received from developers and employers, those who would be impacted by this policy, many of which commented on the impact specifically of the additional funding commitments and a lot of the strategies required under the TDM plans. There is a link in the packet to the full list of those comments, which were too cumbersome to include all in the packet. But DOT also documents in there the changes that were made to the regulation to accommodate some of those requests. DOT did not make changes on many of the requests, stating that the requests had conflict with the code rather than the regulation at hand. Many of the changes that were made were technical in nature, including requirements for MCDOT to provide justification and transparency when modifying the scope of developer TDM plans, and many of them granted DOT some additional flexibility in terms of deciding the scale and scope of those additional requirements. The next section is a brief overview of the committee review, which happened on February 5th, but due to outstanding questions and requests for information, the council voted to extend the deadline, as I mentioned in the beginning, to September 30th. And that is all I have for the presentation before diving into the proposed amendments.
Thank you very much for that, and thank you, Mr. Ali, as well, who helped with this memo and presentation. Director Conklin, do you have any opening comments you want to share?
I'd like to say just a couple things, and thank you to Mr. Kenny for the thorough overview. It is a set of complicated regulations, and I'd like to just start by saying that these regulations were available in draft form at the time the code was adopted, because the code and the interpretation of what was trying to be achieved did rely in large part upon these regulations and what the intent for implementing that code would look like. The regulations and the code deal with two different things: one, existing buildings and employers, and two, new development. The existing building and employers elements of this are not substantially changed from current practice, although there is an expansion geographically of where it's applied. So much of what you see in the regulations about employer plans is what's currently done in the TMDs, and the expansion of that to other areas depends on the establishment of new TMDs and the colors of the various growth and infrastructure policy area designations. But the practices are what are currently in place. The elements related to new development are different with adoption of the code back in 2019. And a lot of that is already in practice and being implemented, waiting for these regulations to be in place. And what the previous practice had been for every development application that needed a TDM plan to enter into a project-specific negotiation, which often became contentious and protracted about what the requirements needed to be for developments. And the code does establish that we need to attain the NADMS in different policy areas, and therefore the onus is on the Department of Transportation to guide these plans so that that is achieved. In working with the development community, real estate lawyers, community organizations, we went through a process to try to sort of take that negotiated process out and to simplify it. And the way that was done was to establish these different tiers of TDM plan requirements And then in each of those tiers, there's either you must participate, you must make progress towards the area's goal, or you must attain the goal for your project. And for those plans that have to attain the goal for their project, the owner of that project has the opportunity to select the plan that they think will work best for them out of a range of options that are available. And then the requirement is for them to adjust that plan if it's not working, and then to commit more of their own effort if over a longer period of time, for example, the 6, 8, 12 years, it's not working. But the intention is that they have control of their plan and can implement a plan to achieve those goals. And while not everybody agreed with this approach, part of the intention of setting the level of effort that we thought was reasonable was there was a concern that we would be unbounded in what we might demand of a project owner to implement their plan. We may say you have to spend $6 million on this program that's going to get 3 people to change their means of commute. And that's, through this process, we tried to make sure that that was obvious, that it isn't the case. The steps are not magic. The increments of additional investment are not magic. But the intention was that there's a certain level of expectation that you'll work to implement your plan. If it's not working, you'll redouble your efforts after a period of time. If it's still not working, you'll redouble your efforts again. But there's a limit, and the limit is 8 times the TDM fee, so 80 cents per square foot for a commercial building. And for most commercial buildings, that's not an extraordinary sum. In fact, the beginning stages of this, if we have a 100,000 square foot building, for a level 2 plan, we're talking about $5,000 of investment. For a level 3 plan, we're talking about $10,000 of investment. So the levels of financial commitment are not extraordinary, but we did provide bounds on it in this regulation so that we are not completely unconstrained in what we might ask somebody to do to achieve these goals. So that's, I just wanted to provide that platform as we get into the individual questions that I know Councilmember Balcom has, and maybe others.
Appreciate that. Extremely helpful. Again, setting the stage. And without further ado, we'll turn it over to Councilmember Balcom.
So much setup. So thank you. I thank you, Chair Glass and Chair Fana-Gonzalez, for the joint committee. So this is a perfect example of why the Economic Development Committee was created in the first place. Very often that impact our businesses and impact economic development, and this provides the opportunity for us to talk through that. When these regulations came before the Transportation and Environment Committee, there was a lot of discussion about the positive impact of telework on the non-auto driver mode share in our transportation management districts. At the same time we were having that discussion about the advantages of telework in the Economic Development Committee, we were talking about the significant negative impact that telework is having on our commercial buildings and our town centers, our restaurants, and our retail. And so both of these conversations were happening at the same time, and it really begs the question of what are we trying to incentivize when it comes to, yes, of course we need to meet our climate action goals. We also need to increase our economic development activity. So that kind of brings us to where we are today with the regulations. I want to thank Ms. Brecker and Ms. Peckett. This has been a long conversation. We've been working on this for 6 months, since February, and so I appreciate the time that both of you took in going through this with me, and also to staff, Mr. Kenny and Mr. Ali, for this. I know that this was very complicated, and I appreciate that much of what the regulation is asking for, it's a formality in that it's already being done to an extent. This is the bill is an expansion, but the regulations really give us an opportunity to say, is this currently what we should be doing? So just want to bring that up. And then from the perspective of reviewing the regulations, so not only am I looking at the significant change in commute patterns, but also questioning the burden that we're placing on employers to change commute behavior, and whether that's an appropriate burden. So also, when the bill was passed, that passed long before the current council came in, and some of my concerns relate to the initial bill. We're not going to discuss that. That's currently code. And so when I went through the amendments, I really tried to focus on what was specifically regulation related and what was code related as we go through. And thank you to staff for identifying what was code related, and that's something that the council will have to look at, whether there should be any subsequent change to the code. And then also from the perspective of the changes that have happened, significant changes since the bill and the code and the regulation was developed. COVID, of course, brings significant change with telework, but also the creation of the Economic Development Committee, which I spoke to, and the requirement that now all legislation is reviewed for its economic impact to make sure that there aren't any unintended consequences. This bill was passed before that took place. So I think those are important changes. And it's also important to know as we go through the discussion that very early on in the packet, we know that given our current experience with telework, our transportation management districts have far surpassed the current goals for non-auto driver mode share. Now, that was based on 2023. We don't know if 2025, when we look at those, whether that's going, we as a society don't know where this is going from a telework perspective. Are more and more people going to telework every day, or is the pendulum going to swing back a little bit further? But I think it's just important as we go through this to note that right now we're meeting our goals. Countywide, I think, if we look at the transportation management districts certainly are. And so that's kind of where we are in, and so the lens I'm looking at is, does it make sense to require our employees to do each of these steps at this particular point in time? So thank you. And do we want to have staff start with the amendments, or do you want? Yeah.
You're done with your.
Yep.
Yeah, Vice President Stewart.
Great, thank you. I think I know the answer to this, but I wanted to ask the question, given that the planning department and planning board are looking at the growth in infrastructure, and that will be updated, and we'll get that end of the summer and fall and talk about it. But because the regulations are based somewhat on those areas, and from looking at the draft, it doesn't look like they're going to throw out those the red, green, and orange, but they do look like there are some modifications to that. And just as a note, in the draft of the growth and infrastructure policy, chapter 3 that is being discussed right now, it talks about how the growth and infrastructure policy has shifted its focus away from strategies that were primarily aimed at reducing motor vehicle congestion. Instead, updates have advanced tactics that enhance the safety and convenience of walking, biking, and transit. This shift aligns with the county's efforts to concentrate growth in areas proximate to jobs, services, and infrastructure, making it easier, safer, and more convenient to walk, bike, and take transit, which reduces dependence on driving. I just say that as a global question on timing, understanding that much of this is already being done. There was, a law passed. We're not changing that. But it seems like there is a shift in focus as we're thinking about how we're tackling this issue, and getting the cart before the horse, I guess, is the kind of question I want to ask. And does it make sense to have the final growth and infrastructure policy before us and then reflect on on these regulations, or are they kind of parallel efforts, informing the other, but we can kind of move forward today with amendments? I just wanted to have that global conversation.
So when the law was initially developed, the concept of the growth areas, the green policy areas, was relatively new. But it was understood that those areas were not permanent and would be changing over time, reflecting either a change in the development character in those areas or a change in policy about why those areas were coded. So the idea of attaining the mode split by those color codes was part of the intention of this, to keep it as a living creature and not prescribed to very certain geographies that may become less relevant over time. So the linkage between this and those areas is purposeful, and I don't think the council's action on changing those areas has a dramatic impact on whether or not these requirements are the right requirements. It does change where the different requirements kick in. So if in your actions you take a yellow policy area currently and make it orange, or orange and turn it red, then different elements of this will apply to buildings in those areas than would have applied if you didn't make those changes. But that was intentional at the time this was drafted, knowing that those things would change over time. I think I answered your question.
Can I add one thing? So, Haley Peckett, Deputy Director for Policy, for the record. I've been very involved in the GIP Planning Board hearings, and the executive branch has been on the record to note that by expanding the policy areas and adding more red and more orange areas, we would hope to achieve more dense development and focus where growth happens. But by doing that and expanding those areas before we have all of the transit in place, for example, and the other infrastructure to support that, we will be doing a bit of catch up. I understand that there's multiple ways to go about that, but the executive branch is saying we need more transportation infrastructure first. It relates to this in that if we do have all the infrastructure in place in those red and orange policy areas, it would be easier for employers and developers to meet those goals.
Great, thank you. I appreciate that time. I just wanted to bring that into our conversation. Thank you.
So I think the point Vice President Stewart makes an important one, because we as a committee, joint committee, have a few options ahead of us. First, it's important to note that this is a Method 2 regulation, and so the proposed amendments that Council Member Balcom has suggested are not ones that we can unilaterally change. They are suggestions to the executive branch, right? Important to go through them, I think. But at the same time, as Mr. Kenny noted and as Vice President Stewart noted, there are conversations that we as a council are about to have that are integral to this. And at this point in time, I would actually make the recommendation, open for conversation though, that Councilmember Balcom's thoughts are on the record. And so the executive branch knows what they are, and I associate myself with many of them. We can go through them if you want, but also with the growth and infrastructure policy, that is another inflection point to engage in this discussion as well. And more broadly, even taking another step back, I have always questioned this particular policy, and if I haven't stated it, I actually voted against it at committee 5 years ago, because I thought there were other ways to try and achieve this goal. And what is also noted, and what was in the bill, an amendment that I added, was to make sure that the county itself has its own strategy, right, leading by example. But we know that so much has changed. I think we need to take a continued pause as we continue having the growth and infrastructure policy and figure out how we do not only get people back to the workplace, but have a broader conversation about what that means. We are about to have a conversation about Ride On Reimagined, which is an integral part to that. We're going to have the T&E committee this afternoon is having a conversation about with WMATA to talk about their proposals and their bus plan, which has also been revised. So there are so many different ways to tackle this issue. Let no one think that this is the sole arbiter of making sure that we have multimodal transportation options for our workers. Yeah, thoughts?
I would like to thank Councilmember Malcolm for bringing this memo and all her thoughts. I also agree with many of the things that you said. And I say this as a former planning board member who voted on plans that had to include the TDM. It's very complicated, and I have worked on 2 different growth policies. This will be my 3rd one. And I look forward to having this conversation in that discussion in the fall. And but I think it's great that you have put this forward, and I'm hoping this has been shared with the planning board now as you're discussing with the growth and infrastructure policy. If they haven't received your memo, they should get it like today, so they know as they prepare their draft in front of us in the fall. So again, thank you so much for leading this.
Councilmember Malcolm?
So I have no idea where this leaves us for now, but I think we should talk about it. So my first inclination when I looked at this was, well, first off, my initial thoughts were we need to change this. When I met with staff, there's so much in the code. So it really is a differentiation between what we can currently change now or what would have to change in the future. And so that was my first decision of whether we even go down this road right now or whether I should just go to the code initially, and decided to go this route, given that we have a deadline of we moved the deadline till the end of September. I did also question the issue of the growth and infrastructure policy of whether that would change. I appreciate that the regulations adapt to any change in the growth and infrastructure policy. However, the concept of expansion of so if, for instance, depending on what happens with the growth policy, and whether this policy areas grow, then that means that this bill, this code, and this law and the regulations continue to expand to others. And I think that is why it matters. And I don't know functionally, I'm looking around for the attorneys. I don't know functionally how this works in terms of can we wait until after the growth policy to move it forward?
The answer is yes.
Yes, the council can set a further deadline than the current one of September 30th. I will note that many of them, all the amendments here are not necessarily tied to anything within the growth and infrastructure policy, at least nominally, although obviously the broader regulation is. I seek direction from the committee of how to proceed.
And so at the heart of it, it's not necessarily a chicken or the egg a conundrum, but this is a proposal to mitigate growth and infrastructure at its heart. It's as the community has continued to grow. That's why the iterations of this policy have gone back decades, and they culminated in this statute that was passed in 2019. And a lot, again, has happened in between then and now, and we do have a growth and infrastructure policy, a quadrennial review of it coming up in the next few months. And so I'll recommend that we hold the regulation till the end of the calendar year, so we go through the growth and infrastructure policy, and then we can determine next steps. And to Councilmember Malcolm's point, whether it is recommending changes to the Method 2 regulation, or, if needed, making changes to the underlying law, that would afford us enough time.
Yes.
Colleagues?
Yes, I support that. I think that I do want to just mention a couple of the issues that I think that I will be looking for in the future is this discrepancy between attracting new businesses, trying to enliven our town centers post COVID. I think that we are looking at incentivizing two competing issues here: getting people back into the office versus keeping people back at home, and we need to grapple with that as a county. The other issue I think that is really critical when we look at that I'm going to be looking at the growth policy issue is the county's responsibility for funding and building the infrastructure. So we can't have goals to get people out of their cars, and particularly when we're looking at the map that expands it out to areas that don't have transit. And so I think that's an issue that we just have to grapple with, and we can't set expectations for anyone to get out of their car if we don't have options. And so I think that that's something that we need to look at specifically. There was one more thing that just flew right out. So I think that's both of those issues are that we need to resolve before we codify regulations. And I appreciate that people are already doing this, but celebrating the fact that nobody's coming into offices at the same time that we're begging people to come back to offices is just doesn't make sense.
Thank you for that. Technical question. Some of the proposals, or how many of the proposals that Councilmember Balcom has made, and we're not going through them right now, but are they, would they require a resubmittal for public input for Method 2? Do we know if they were adopted? And I asked that question having been following the rent stabilization conversation, where the changes that were requested or not are one addition was not necessarily germane.
Council staff, and after conversations with our attorneys, does not believe, we don't have a final determination on exactly whether this would require a resubmittal to the county register.
Yeah.
But given that these amendments and would not expand or modify the scope, they're rather textual changes that sort of remain within the scope of the current regulation. Do not believe that this would require republishing in the county register, but again, we've yet to receive a final determination from the county attorney on that.
Okay. Director Conklin and team, do you have any thoughts on what you're hearing?
Yeah, I was going to make a couple of points for the committee's benefit. One, TDM regulations like this are not unusual in this region or in geographies that Montgomery County is competing with for employers or other development. So nobody here remembers, but at the time these were proposed, this bill was proposed, there was an analysis of what other jurisdictions like the District of Columbia, Arlington, Alexandria, and other similar, Fairfax County, were doing in this arena, and our practices were generally in line with the region's practices. And secondly, the issue of telecommuting is a new development by and large since the pandemic. Telecommuting has always been a strategy for transportation demand management, but had not been the principal strategy. And the change that you really see in these statistics is around telecommuting. So another way to think about this is, do we want to adjust the way the goals are framed that are around those commuting? In what manner are they traveling rather than are we encouraging people to be at home and not commute at all? Because that gets to the goals that had been the intended goals at the beginning, was we were trying to get people to walk and take transit and carpool to work rather than to not go to work. Not going to work was an option, but it wasn't the principal strategy people were considering at the time. So that is a fundamental change in the landscape here since that was put out there. At some point, we will need to come to terms with having a regulation that's aligned with the code so that we are implementing this in a reasonable way. Right now, we're implementing it based on the code with an expectation of regulation, but without the regulation, and that is a precarious place for us to be for a very long time. But we have been in that place for a reasonably long time already. We are seeing the last of the transportation mitigation agreements or traffic mitigation agreements that were required in the development approval processes for previous projects flow now, and these are starting to become the norm in how projects are approved. So we will need to move either changing this program through legislation in a grander way or making these sorts of adjustments now. And one thing that I can offer, there are a number of elements in here in the regulation that say, you know, this may include, and there are examples in there to try to give clarity for applicants or owners into what the range of things that might be expected are. I don't know that those are necessary in the regulation. It could be that there's additional program guidance from the department that outlines what the typical expectations are, and the regulation might be able to be streamlined some based on some of the comments we've seen from Councilmember Balcombe. There are a few that are corrections that are easy to do, and there are others that are more fundamental about, like, the training is not supposed to be, you know, 2 days of training. It's maybe an hour of training. So there may be some expectations that are unclear in the regulation about how onerous we think these things are. So that may need some adjustment. And there are elements like the department giving or promoting different alternatives in the facility. That's really fundamental and also a requirement of some of the grants that fund these activities. So we may need to keep some of those items so we can take a look at the comments that have been provided and try to bracket them into corrections, adjustments, or things we could devolve to guidance that are not part of the regulation, and that might help the committee when this comes before you again.
I think those are very helpful comments, seeing nods, and what we will do is particularly these two committees, as we go through joint the growth and infrastructure, we will keep our mind on this policy as well and figure out what that interplay is.
Could I just make one comment? I'm
please.
Sandy Brecker from Commuter Services in DOT. I do want to note, with regard to Councilmember Balcombe's concern about burdening employers, employers do have a really critical role to play in any transportation demand management effort. And I think, Councilmember Glass, that's one of the reasons why you did append that requirement to the end of the bill with regard to the county itself as a major employer adopting that type of an approach to have a plan. We do have many policies here in the county that do support alternative modes, and we do offer, for example, transit subsidies now at the maximum level. That's something that only employers, for the most part, can do under federal law, and tax-free and all of that. So I just want to note that employers do really have a critical role to play in all this, and this is all part of a national, federal, as well as regional and state effort. And so some of the things that we're doing are, as Director Conklin mentioned, consistent with our grants that we receive from those programs and consistent with the overall program goals of those efforts. So as you're looking at this again, I just want to make sure that it's done in the context of what we're trying to achieve as a region and as a nation as well. Thanks.
I appreciate those comments, Ms. Brecker. And yes, the reason I required in the legislation that the county have our own plan is because we were asking private employers to do it, we should be doing it ourselves. And the broader point you're making, again, I think we collectively do agree that commuting to the workplace requires some coordination and intentionality among the employers to how people are getting to work. But as we discussed, I think, earlier this year, back in February, we do have people who cannot afford to live in Montgomery County. and they do come here from far and wide, and those considerations need to be taken into account, but plus the pandemic, plus the growth in infrastructure policy. So all of this combined gives us reason to just think a little bit more about it.
I just wanted to say two things related to the growth and infrastructure policy as it relates to this next gen TDM law. And it's relating to both cost and time and the scale here. So the planning board has really focused on the affordable housing crisis, and that when we're expanding red, orange, yellow policy areas, it's to make it more affordable to build affordable housing. Not allowed to talk about employment, but I understand that's part of it too. And so a lot of the changes that are made in the growth and infrastructure policy, which you'll discuss later, are ways to take the burden off of developers for building the physical infrastructure, which may include transit, bike, and ped infrastructure. That has costs of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. When we talk about TDM, the cost is much lower. We've said $5,000 per year. And I want to note that the time frame is different too, and this has been something we've commented on. By signaling with the growth and infrastructure policy, we want to encourage growth in these areas. We hope that 5 or 10 years from now, there's a huge influx in growth and that people are moving in. When we require something for a developer, that starts when the building is occupied. They start providing information. They start providing trainings and incentives for their employees. So I just want to note that those might have different implications in terms of times and cost, even though we're considering them at the same time.
Important context. Unless there's any objection, we'll hold the regulation, we'll extend the regulation until the end of the calendar year.
Sorry, just to clarify the intent of the committee, are we looking to, when the committee reviews this again, have a draft, a new regulation, requesting a new regulation be submitted by DOT that generally incorporates the amendments, or consider the regulation as it is written now?
Well, so again, a few different paths to go through. We haven't gone through necessarily all of Councilmember Balcom's amendments. I think many, if not all of them, make sense. And not wanting to take this time to go through all of that, instruct next steps. Did you want to comment?
So I think, Director Conklin talked about, so perhaps a next step would be working together. I can Mr. Kenny and I could work together with Ms. Brecker and Ms. Peckett to look at which ones are technical in nature, and then come back with a proposal to this committee where we wouldn't have to go one by one, and come back to with a recommendation.
We're certainly open to working with the committee and council staff to take another pass through this and have a revised version.
So then, Madam Chair, we'll do another hearing in the fall after growth and infrastructure.
I will be so delighted to feel such thing.
Okay.
Right. And so we will, the original plan was to review this again on September 9th, and so hearing that is not.
Yeah, I think we'll hold.
Just to
we'll push that back
great.
to this fall.
So council staff will prepare a resolution to extend the deadline for the approval of the regulation to give this committee more time to meet again and discuss this further.
Very good. Okay.
Super.
Thank you, colleagues. Anything else from a co-chair? No, we're good. This joint committee is adjourned. Thank you very much. Do you go to the doctor and are you healthy? You're both healthy?